Steve McQueen sat at the green felt table with the calm of a man who understood that poker wasn't about cards. It was about reading souls. Across from him, Marvin drained another whiskey and called him a kid who thinks luck makes him tough. The smoke-filled room at Beverly Hills, most exclusive underground poker club, fell silent as McQueen pushed his entire stack forward and proved that real risk isn't about what you're willing to lose, it's about what you're willing to win. The ice in Marvin's glass suddenly sounded like rattling bones. If you respect the real Steve McQueen, subscribe to Steve McQueen Untold Legacy, March 1965. Beverly Hills, California. The Chateau Marmont's secret back room where Hollywood's elite gathered for games that lasted until sunrise and stakes that could buy small countries. Thick cigar smoke hung in the air like fog over a battlefield, mixing with the scent of expensive bourbon and the kind of tension that came when men who made their living pretending to be tough tested whether any of that toughness was real. This wasn't the sanitized glamour of studio commissaries or awards ceremonies. This was neutral territory where reputation meant nothing and capability was the only currency that mattered. Where stars discovered whether their screen personas could survive contact with actual danger, measured in dollars that represented more than most people earned in lifetimes. Marvin, 41 years old, commanded the head of the table like a general who'd seen combat and understood that civilian games were just elaborate training exercises for the real battles that shaped character. His weathered face carried scars from actual military service in the Pacific, where he'd learned that survival often depended more on psychological warfare than superior firepower. Hollywood's premier tough guy, the actor other actors feared because his menace wasn't manufactured in acting classes. It was earned through encounters with genuine violence. His drink was straight bourbon, no ice, consumed with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd learned to handle alcohol as both weapon and tool. The liquid never seemed to affect his judgment or reflexes, just intensified the dangerous stillness that had made him famous for playing men who killed without hesitation or regret. Tonight he wore a simple black suit that somehow looked more threatening than elaborate costumes designed by studio professionals. Steve McQueen, 35 years old, occupied the opposite end of the table with the coiled energy of someone who treated every contest like an opportunity to prove something to himself and the world. Fresh from completing the Cincinnati Kid, where he'd played a poker player with ambitions that exceeded his experience, he'd spent months studying the psychology of gambling with the same intensity he applied to motorcycle racing and firearms training. But McQueen's approach to poker reflected his background rather than his recent education. This was a man who'd learned to read people's intentions in reform schools and military barracks, where misunderstanding someone's character could result in consequences more permanent than losing money. His pale blue eyes missed nothing. The slight tremor in a hand reaching for chips, the barely perceptible change in breathing patterns that preceded bluffs, the micro-expressions that revealed whether confidence was genuine or manufactured. The game had been running for 4 hours, drawing players whose combined net worth exceeded the gross national product of most developing nations. Studio executives, prominent agents, established stars who understood that these weekly gatherings served purposes beyond entertainment. This was where real business got conducted, where alliances were formed and dissolved, where the actual power structure of Hollywood revealed itself through who won and who lost when the stakes were high enough to matter. Marvin had been dominating the table with the ruthless efficiency that characterized his approach to everything. Each hand played with calculated aggression that combined mathematical precision with psychological intimidation, using his reputation as both weapon and shield. Other players folded to raises that might have been bluffs, unwilling to test whether Marvin's legendary toughness extended to situations where the danger was financial rather than physical. "Kid's been playing tight all night," Marvin observed, gesturing toward McQueen with his bourbon glass, "waiting for the nuts before he commits serious money." "Smart strategy," replied one of the studio executives, a nervous man whose film empire depended more on other people's talent than his own judgment. "No point taking unnecessary risks." "Depends how you define risk," McQueen said quietly. his voice carrying none of the theatrical projection that most actors automatically applied to group conversations. Some people think avoiding loss is the same as achieving victory. Marvin's eyes narrowed with interest. This was the first time McQueen had contributed anything beyond mandatory betting decisions, and the comments suggested philosophical depths that went beyond simple card strategy. You think there's a difference, Steve? I know there's a difference. Avoiding loss keeps you even. Achieving victory requires risking everything you've already won. Spoken like someone who's never lost anything that really mattered. The observation hung in the smoke-filled air, like a challenge that transcended poker strategy to examine fundamental differences in life experience and risk tolerance. Marvin was suggesting that McQueen's confidence came from ignorance rather than wisdom, that his willingness to gamble reflected inexperience with genuine consequences rather than genuine courage. Maybe, McQueen acknowledged, or maybe spoken like someone who understands that some things are worth risking everything to win. Such as respect. From people whose respect is worth having. The dealer, a professional who'd worked these games long enough to recognize when conversation was moving beyond casual banter into territory that could affect the outcome of significant wagers, shuffled the cards with mechanical precision that ignored the psychological warfare developing between two of Hollywood's most compelling screen presences. 5-card stud, gentlemen. Ante is 500. The betting began with routine efficiency that masked the underlying tension. Each player contributed their ante without discussion, understanding that serious poker required serious stakes to eliminate casual participants who might otherwise disrupt the game's rhythm with frivolous decision-making. McQueen received his cards with the same controlled attention he applied to everything that involved competition or chance. 2 queens, 1 showing, 1 hidden. Strong starting hand that could develop into something exceptional or remain merely good depending on how the remaining cards fell and how aggressively other players decided to pursue their own possibilities. Marvin's showing card was a jack of spades, which could mean anything or nothing depending on what he'd received face down. His expression revealed nothing beyond the professional neutrality he'd perfected through decades of playing men whose survival depended on concealing their intentions from enemies who would kill them if they detected weakness or uncertainty. The first round of betting proceeded without drama. Standard raises that tested commitment levels without forcing anyone to make decisions that would eliminate them from the hand if their cards failed to improve. Professional poker played by people who understood that patience was more valuable than aggression in situations where multiple hands would determine the evening's ultimate winner. But Marvin's attention was focused less on his cards than on McQueen's behavior patterns, studying the younger actor with the analytical intensity he'd once applied to enemy positions and tactical situations. Looking for tells that would reveal whether McQueen's confidence was based on superior cards or superior acting ability. Steve, can I ask you something? Sure. You ever lose at anything that mattered? The question was delivered with casual tone that didn't disguise its serious intent. Marvin was probing for psychological information that could be used strategically, testing whether McQueen's gambling confidence was based on genuine resilience or simply lack of experience with significant failure. Lost plenty of things that mattered, Lee. Just learned not to let losing become a habit. How do you do that? By understanding the difference between losing because you played poorly and losing because the other guy played better. First kind teaches you lessons. Second kind teaches you respect. And which kind of loss do you think you're facing tonight? McQueen smiled with genuine humor that carried no defensive edge. Haven't lost yet. Still gathering information about what kind of player you are when the stakes get interesting. The dealer distributed the next round of cards with mechanical efficiency that ignored the psychological examination taking place around the green felt table. McQueen received another queen, giving him trips with 2 cards still to come. Extraordinarily strong hand that could justify significant aggression if played correctly. Marvin's second card was a 10 of spades, giving him possible straight or flush draws that could develop into hands strong enough to challenge anyone else's holding. But his betting behavior suggested confidence that went beyond what his showing cards would normally justify, raising questions about whether his hidden card provided genuine strength or whether he was simply testing other players' commitment levels. Bettings to you, Steve. McQueen studied the pot, which had grown to represent serious money even by Hollywood standards. Enough to buy expensive cars or finance independent film productions, but not enough to justify conservative play if genuine opportunity presented itself. Raise 5,000. The increase was substantial enough to eliminate casual participants while remaining small enough to encourage calls from players with legitimate hands. Standard aggressive poker that balanced pressure with possibility, forcing opponents to make decisions that revealed information about their holdings and intentions. Marvin called without hesitation. His decision communicated through body language that suggested complete confidence in his ability to handle whatever cards fell and whatever betting pressures developed in subsequent rounds. 2 other players folded, understanding that continuing would require commitments they weren't prepared to make against opponents whose reputation suggested superior skills and greater willingness to risk significant money on uncertain outcomes. "Just you and me now, kid. Just cards and courage, Lee." The third card round revealed crucial information about both players' prospects. McQueen received a meaningless 7 that didn't improve his trips but didn't hurt his position. Marvin received the Queen of Spades, giving him 3 spades, showing and possible flush potential that could justify the confidence he'd been displaying throughout the hand. "Your bet, Lee." Marvin studied his cards with the same analytical attention he'd once applied to life-or-death tactical decisions, calculating odds, evaluating risks, estimating his opponent's likely holdings based on betting patterns and psychological observations accumulated over hours of careful study. 10,000. The bet was large enough to represent serious commitment while remaining small enough to encourage a call if McQueen's hand justified continued participation. Professional poker psychology that balanced aggression with invitation, creating situations where opponents faced difficult decisions that revealed important information regardless of how they responded. McQueen considered his options with the methodical attention that characterized his approach to all important decisions. His trips were strong enough to justify calling, possibly strong enough to justify raising, but the pot was growing to levels where mistakes would be measured in amounts that exceeded reasonable entertainment expenses. Call. The decision communicated confidence without revealing the specific source of that confidence. McQueen could be calling with a strong hand that feared Marvin's possible flush, or with a marginal hand that hoped to improve, or with complete air and an elaborate bluff designed to win through psychological pressure rather than superior cards. The fourth card round would determine whether this hand developed into climactic confrontation or anticlimactic conclusion. McQueen received another meaningless card, leaving his trips unchanged but preventing improvement to full house or 4 of a kind. Marvin received the Ace of Spades, giving him 4 spades showing and virtual certainty of completing his flush if his hidden card provided the 5th spade he needed. Ace of Spades bets, the dealer announced, following standard protocol that gave betting initiative to the player showing the strongest possible hand. Marvin stared at his cards as if seeing them for the first time, though his expression revealed nothing about whether the ace had completed a monster hand or simply provided another meaningless high card in a failed drawing attempt. "Steve, let me ask you something before I bet." "Go ahead." "You think courage is about not being afraid, or about being afraid and acting anyway?" The philosophical question seemed disconnected from poker strategy, but McQueen understood that Marvin was probing for psychological information that could influence how the hand concluded, testing whether McQueen's confidence was based on genuine fearlessness or simply on better concealment of natural anxiety. Depends on the situation. Sometimes courage is about accepting fear and acting despite it. Sometimes courage is about understanding that the thing you're afraid of isn't actually dangerous. And which situation do you think we're in right now? Right now, I think we're in a situation where being afraid of losing money isn't courage or cowardice. It's just good sense applied to entertainment that happens to have expensive stakes. Interesting perspective, honest perspective. This is a game, Lee. Expensive game, complicated game that requires skill and psychology and mathematical understanding, but still just a game between people who can afford to lose what they're risking. Marvin smiled with genuine appreciation for McQueen's analysis, understanding that the younger actor had revealed something important about his psychological approach to risk and competition. "All in," Marvin announced, pushing his entire stack toward the center of the table. The bet represented approximately $50,000, enough to buy multiple houses in most American cities, enough to finance entire film productions, enough to eliminate any pretense that this was casual entertainment rather than serious psychological warfare with financial consequences. The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of ice settling in abandoned drinks and the distant hum of Beverly Hills traffic carrying other people towards safer forms of entertainment. Every person present understood that they were witnessing something that transcended normal poker strategy to examine fundamental questions about courage, risk tolerance, and the relationship between screen personas and authentic character. McQueen studied his cards one final time, though he'd memorized their value hours earlier. 3 queens against Marvin's possible flush, with approximately $50,000 riding on the outcome. Strong hand facing stronger possibility, with enough money at stake to represent genuine consequence rather than symbolic gesture. Lee, can I tell you something before I make my decision? Sure. You're right about one thing. I haven't lost anything that really mattered. At least not in the way you probably mean. Haven't been to war. Haven't faced situations where making the wrong choice meant people died. Then why are you even considering calling a bet this size? Because some lessons can only be learned by risking things you can't afford to lose. Because courage isn't just about physical danger. It's about psychological honesty when the stakes are high enough to matter. McQueen looked directly at Marvin, with those pale blue eyes that had made audiences pay attention since he'd first appeared on screen. And because I think you're bluffing. What makes you think that? Because a man with a sure winner doesn't need to deliver philosophical lectures before he bets. He just bets and waits for people to pay him. The observation hung in the air like smoke from expensive cigars, revealing psychological insight that went beyond card reading to character analysis. McQueen was suggesting that Marvin's psychological tactics indicated uncertainty rather than strength, that genuine confidence would manifest through action rather than conversation. Call, McQueen announced, pushing his own stack forward to match Marvin's all-in bet. The confrontation was complete. Approximately $100,000 in the center of the table, 2 of Hollywood's most compelling actors committed to a contest that would determine more than financial outcome. It would establish which man's approach to risk and courage better served him when the stakes exceeded comfortable levels. Marvin flipped his hidden card first, revealing the 2 of hearts that failed to complete his flush and left him with nothing but ace high. His 4 spades had been an elaborate bluff, designed to win through intimidation rather than superior cards, psychological warfare that had failed against an opponent who understood that sometimes the most dangerous thing about a man wasn't his reputation, but his willingness to test that reputation against reality. McQueen revealed his 3 queens with quiet satisfaction that carried no trace of gloating or excessive celebration. Just professional acknowledgement that his reading of the situation had proven accurate and his risk had been rewarded appropriately. The room remained silent as the dealer counted out chips representing more money than most people earned in multiple years, transferring wealth from one Hollywood legend to another based on decisions that had revealed important truths about courage, psychology, and the relationship between authentic toughness and manufactured intimidation. Hell of a call, kid, Marvin said, extending his hand in acknowledgement of superior play and superior judgment. Hell of a bluff, Lee. Had me worried until you started explaining why I should fold. Lesson learned. Next time I'll let the cards do the talking. Next time I might not have 3 queens. Next time I might not be bluffing. Both men understood that this hand had established something more valuable than financial victory or defeat. They'd tested their authentic characters against each other and discovered mutual respect that couldn't be manufactured through studio publicity or professional courtesy. As the game continued with smaller stakes and lighter atmosphere, McQueen understood that he'd learned something about himself that no acting coach or director could teach. He discovered that his screen persona wasn't just performance, It was authentic expression of character traits that could survive testing against genuine danger when the stakes were high enough to matter. Marvin had learned something equally valuable, that generational talent could coexist with generational toughness, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who looked like they were still learning but had actually been studying longer than anyone realized. The smoke-filled room gradually emptied as dawn approached Beverly Hills with golden light that made the previous night's tension seem less dramatic and more educational. Both men had been changed by the encounter in ways that would influence every future performance, understanding that authenticity wasn't just about resembling tough characters. It was about being tough enough to honor those characters through genuine courage when circumstances demanded it. Steve McQueen left the Chateau Marmont $50,000 richer and infinitely wiser about the relationship between risk and reward, knowing that some victories could only be achieved by people willing to lose everything in pursuit of something more valuable than money. The knowledge that their courage was real rather than manufactured. Lee Marvin left with lighter pockets but deeper respect for a younger actor who'd proven that intimidation was temporary but character was permanent, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who understood that true toughness came from within, rather than from reputation or experience. The poker table had taught both men that authenticity couldn't be faked when the stakes were high enough to matter, and that real courage was measured not by what you'd survived in the past, but by what you were willing to risk in the present when opportunity demanded everything you had. Subscribe to Steve McQueen Untold Legacy for stories they never told you.